Lonnie lounged against the bulky body of an Aldebaranian draped in an airtight suit and studied the timetable of incoming ships. On one side of him was a pylon, one of a long line of pylons that made up the inner frame of the station's huge shell, and on the other was the Aldebaran's luggage, a multitude of identical oblong, airtight boxes stacked neatly on 3 anti-grav platforms. The Aldebaranian's body made a good cover, too. To detect Lonnie, a guard or patrol drone would need to know for sure that he was hiding in this makeshift cubbyhole. But they didn't, and couldn't. Of course, the Aldebaranian would also move in for boarding at some point in the future, but judging by his position, it wouldn't be any time soon. Lonnie didn't dare peer through the porthole of the pressure suit to see the Aldebaranian's face through the chloride clouds, but it was clear enough that the big alien was dozing. None of his 8 limbs moved, only the dorsal breathing cavity rising and falling. That was fine. Lonnie wasn't going to wait for the big guy to wake up. All he had to do was study the arrival schedule, mark all the late ones, and choose the most suitable one for his purposes. So, what do we have here? The Pan-Galactic Express from Procyon was running late, but there wasn't even an estimated arrival time on the scoreboard yet. Okay, this one is off, although Lonnie would love to get on it. There was always a good crowd coming from Procyon. Wealthy tourists who wanted to familiarize themselves with Beta Station and have a good time in the clubs and casinos of the station's western district, businessmen representing transgalactic corporations headquartered in Procyon's Gaja orbitals and going on the hunt for promising contracts in the border sectors and the like. Unfortunately, until the situation becomes clearer, they will have to be shelved for now. The Deneb Trans-D was arriving in 17 minutes, berth 6, gates 142-147. Lonnie grumbled frustratedly. Pier 6 and the farthest gates. There was no way he could get there in time for arrival, and it made sense to handle Trans-D liners only while the business class passengers were getting off. In economy class, contract miners usually traveled to the Gorgon system or somewhere in Solomon's Belt. They will be poor as void dust eaters. It will be a different matter on their way back, of course. Miners are not used to counting big money. You don't even have to do anything. Just stick around, and you're all good. There was nothing else suitable on the screen. Lonnie thoughtfully popped a lollipop into his mouth. It looked like he wouldn't be able to make any money today from the rush, as he called the passengers from the delayed ships, who were in a hurry to catch a connecting flight or some important meeting at the station. It wasn't that much of a problem, as it was a good month. But an extra financial safety cushion never hurts, especially with the rumors that Josiah was considering raising the security contribution bar. Lonnie spat on the floor tiles. Damn bloody racketeer, that Josiah. That's what he is. What kind of stupid security is that if you have to get rid of the guards yourself in case of anything? Good thing there's a long-standing unspoken agreement with other station rats not to get in each other's way. But don't you dare to not pay the rent. No, you're not going to get hurt. Josiah is not that stupid. But how can you honestly con on rushing passengers if you have some ugly, gloomy bouncer hanging around behind your back 24/7? But Lonnie didn't want to waste the evening now that he was out working. He decided to make some quick cash as an inviter at the old Emlo's bar. Lonnie was on cool terms with the elderly Calerian, who paid Lonnie a fixed rate for every customer who came by the flyer. Few people wanted to do business with Emlo. Even here, on extremely cosmopolitan Beta, the 2.5-meter tall insectoid figure of a Calerian with powerful mandibles caused many people to feel unaccountable xenophobia. Even though Emlo was the sweetest and kindest of creatures, often providing free food and drink to poor people who had lost at the casino or been robbed of their money by Josiah's thugs. Lonnie cautiously peeked out from his hiding place and looked around. there were no guards in sight. Unfortunately, he was already well known to the guards of all 6 main docks of Beta Station, and they had orders to throw him out immediately if they found him. On the bright side, what was there to fear now? He wouldn't be working here, so he could go on his way. The guards were engrossed in some incredibly important security business in their office, like drinking coffee or playing cards. Only a lanky blue figure, an Andurian named Chul Dawn, was sticking out at the far exit. It was a good thing that Andurians, always busy with their endless military exercises, rarely came to Beta. They make excellent guards, vigilant, incorruptible, and meticulous in following instructions, down to the last footnote in the fine print. Or, from Lonnie's point of view, terrible. You can't slip past them and won't be able to talk them off if they catch you. Lonnie calmly made his way to the main exit, glancing at the closed gate for arrivals. The mirrored panels returned his attention, revealing the scraggly figure of a 15-year-old boy in a standard jumpsuit and with messy hair. Lonnie winked to himself and walked on. Rows of stalls with garish souvenirs for simpletons. Who would buy souvenirs at the dock area, if buy such crap at all? A couple of interracial restaurants that smelled of the usual inedible mixture of odors. Before leaving the station for the shuttle terminal, Lonnie cast one more parting glance at the schedule of arriving flights and froze. In 40 minutes, the Atlas suite from the Chemosphere was arriving. The same one whose arrival had been postponed indefinitely yesterday. Lonnie looked puzzled at the timetable. Usually, delayed flights were announced a few hours in advance to give everyone a chance to get to the proper dock and gate, but he was sure this flight hadn't been on the schedule 10 minutes ago. Either way, Atlas was a bread-and-butter story. Gates 63 through 67. No need to even hop on a shuttle. It's easier to walk to the next dock. Just gotta slip past the damn Andurian somehow. Lonnie sighed, looking around. Damn, the waiting room was empty. The few passengers and greeters had already dispersed, as they usually did, to secluded corners and cafes. Only the Aldebaranian was looming in the middle of the hall with his luggage, like a boulder left behind by a retreating glacier. The luggage. The anti-grav platform with its stack of Aldebaranian's containers passed silently through the nearly empty hall until it crunched and clattered into the window of a souvenir shop just behind the Andurian's back. Lonnie was lucky. Tishol didn't notice the platform until the very last moment, preoccupied with watching what he considered an extremely suspicious pair of biomechs from Rigel. The Andurian bio-Puritan's aversion to cyborgs, artificial intelligence, and races more at ease with cyber implants was perhaps this harsh civilization's most well-known and major weakness. Anyway, while the Andurian was calming the hysterically screaming shop owner, while they were sorting out and separating the luggage from the souvenir junk, while they were calming the Aldebaranian who had woken up and rumbled to the noise and commotion and whose poorly adjusted vocoder was making horrible ducking noises, Lonnie slipped past the guard post to the next pier unnoticed. Luck had not deserted him. The guards on duty at the transition to the third berth hall and in the hall itself were recent hires. They'd probably been given orientation cards of regular station rats like Lonnie, but it would be a tall task to remember 40 faces of different races, ages, and genders on the first try, especially if all this was pretty shifty. Lonnie even knew a metaprime from Unte, who, as was customary for his race, had already changed 3 genders and was now in an intermediate intersex state. However, most of his acquaintances still addressed him as a man, and the metaprime, who looked like a surreal mix of a cat and a pelican, didn't mind. As Lonnie took a strategic position at a diner table in direct line of sight of the still-closed arrivals gate, there were about 10 more minutes left until the suite arrived. The first passengers would take another 10 minutes to go through customs. There was some time to ponder about the strange situation. Why wasn't the arrival time announced? This happened occasionally, but very rarely. Most of the time, it was just a simple technical glitch. Someone entered the wrong number, or some particularly nasty Trojan spoiled the system. One time, Trans-D made a hell of a fuss when a charter liner disappeared from their schedule. Relatives and friends of the passengers stormed the offices of the station Beta authorities until the liner arrived, and it turned out that the fugitive dictator of some obscure planet, whose population had decided to kick him out, had paid a tidy sum to keep the date of its arrival at the station a secret. It didn't work, by the way. The patriots from that planet found and arrested him just 2 weeks later in the resort belt. But a flight that had been postponed indefinitely and suddenly appeared on the schedule? Lonnie didn't remember such a thing. Something was definitely off here. But that didn't concern him. His business was to make money on the right client and let the station security service deal with the mysteries. A yellow indicator lit up on the timetable next to the Atlas flight number. This meant that the passengers had already boarded the station and were now beginning to go through customs. Lonnie was wary, but he didn't get up from the table. There were practically no greeters, and even the greenest security guard would recognize Lonnie hanging around the exit from the customs area. Lonnie did not look like the sweet passenger's relative or business partner. First out of the gate were 12 green-skinned Telians, one of the dominant races of the chemosphere. Lonnie didn't even bother to give them a glance. Extremely religious. The Telians were the most avaricious people in the galaxy, spending all their income on building insanely expensive temples wherever they could get permission to do so. Lonnie remembered one such temple he had once seen on Maat and shuddered. He really wanted to believe that they wouldn't be allowed to build such an abomination here on Beta. The usual stream of passengers streamed in after the Telians. Half of them were Terrans. The rest were a mixture of different races, humanoid, not very humanoid, and far from humanoid, mostly oxygen-breathing. Though some poor souls had to wear breathing masks or even a pressurized spacesuit on Beta, a station with Earth-type basic conditions, like the sleepy Aldebaranian at the second berth. Lonnie cast only a fleeting glance at some, while others he studied more carefully for profit. He had to think fast before the passenger boarded the shuttle and sped away to a hotel, to the business meeting, or to catch a connecting flight. Lonnie wrote off those who left the gate without looking around and confidently headed for the exit or transitions to neighboring piers. It was clear that they were seasoned travelers or permanent residents of Beta. In theory, it was possible for experienced station rats to process them too, but with unpredictable results, and it would take a lot of time. He was more interested in those who stopped to look at the waiting room's interior or the communicator, obviously checking the scheme of the station and transportation options. He had already chosen a stocky, chubby Culvinian with a breathing mask that covered a reptiloid face adorned with implanted sapphires, the mark of the highest caste of traders allowed to engage in interstellar commerce, and headed toward him with a slow gait of polite submission. The Culvinians loved it when aliens obeyed traditional Culv rituals. But suddenly, a tall figure appeared out of the gate, changing all of Lonnie's plans at once. The war with the Iln Empire had ended 20 years ago, with the latter's defeat. However, the Imperials themselves did not recognize the defeat and believed they had made peace on favorable terms because the word surrender was not in the treaty. At the same time, just in case, they restricted the possibility of traveling outside the Empire for all subjects except for military hierarchs and members of the Imperial family, so as not to confuse minds with the spectacle of how strangers, who were supposedly forced to make peace, lived. A tall man in a black and silver tunic and pants with stripes, judging by the 3 scarlet chevrons, belonged to the top leadership of the inner circle. The secret police, a virtually omnipotent, within the borders of the Empire, of course, organization that spread its merciless tentacles over 36 star systems. He, of course, was unaffected by any restrictions on traveling anywhere, though one could only wonder what he might have wanted on Beta Station, which from the Empire's point of view was a rotten nest of vice and debauchery. But Lonnie was not interested in the Ilnian's motives. He was much more concerned with another question. How had the Ilnian come to be aboard this ship in the first place? The Empire's relations with the Chemosphere were even worse than with the Terran Federation, and the only thing that kept the Iln from war was that the Chemosphere was on the opposite edge of known space from the Empire, and the Ilnians were not very good at long-range galactic transportation. You wouldn't bring in the planetary stormtroops and supplies for them by commercial charters. Or would you? Ilnian was the last to leave. The gate behind him closed and never opened again, so there were no more passengers on board. At least, that's what the rules were supposed to say. Lonnie looked at the Ilnian, who was looking around somewhat uncertainly. Crap. Why am I getting into this? Lonnie thought, and walked determinedly toward the officer. The best hotels on the station, sir. Any place of your choice? The best views and casinos in the resort belt, or at the Golden Arch? Ilnian stared at Lonnie with a puzzled and slightly irritated look, but Lonnie didn't back down, continuing to gibber. Or are you here on business, looking for partners, investment targets, a lucrative contract? Sarif Hotel is the perfect place to negotiate and search for partners in the business sector. Up to 15% off with my flyer. Transportation is free. Just tell me what you need, sir, and I'll get it to you in a jiffy. I have connections in all station sectors. In the starting processing, the main thing was not to let the client come to his senses and to realize that the services offered by the station rat did not really cost a penny, and all this could be found out and organized by running a couple of searches in the communicator. However, not everyone arriving at the Beta Station knew it, and even those who did were sometimes lost under the pressure of rats. Strictly speaking, the rats did nothing illegal, but the station security still chased them away. It was believed that by harassing the passengers, the rats were harming the station's prestige. Lonnie continued to work the Imperial hard, glancing with one eye toward the guard post. A flattened spheroid of a patrol drone was hanging in the air, slowly rotating, with 2 Endurians in security uniforms standing nearby, talking lazily. Lonnie didn't know these 2 new recruits. A lot of Endurians had been joining the guards lately. Well, no surprise here. All the better, since they were new, they could hardly remember Lonnie's face and might well take him for an ordinary greeter from some cheaper hotel, which often hired teenagers. The Ilnian aristocrat was already confused. Back home, in the Empire, no one would dare approach him, and if they did, the officer would simply pummel them with his stack. He couldn't afford to do that here, though the desire was evident on his face. So he probably wasn't new to traveling outside the Empire. Lonnie was gradually shifting toward the exit, and the Imperial, as if hypnotized, followed, especially since he had to go toward the shuttle stop anyway. Finally, they slowly walked behind the massive pylon of the supporting structure, which blocked the direct visibility of the guards and, most importantly, of the patrol drone. And Lonnie did something he hadn't done for a long time, making sure that there were no other passengers, cleaners, or anyone else around. He took the Ilnian's hand. The aristocrat didn't even realize what had happened at first, but it was too late for him to be surprised or, as he was supposed to be, offended by such an unceremonious display of insolence. Thin, sharp threads sprouted through Lonnie's palm like rapidly growing metallic mold and embedded themselves in the Ilnian's skin. They were so thin, however, that the officer felt almost nothing. When he tried to pull his hand away, he found that he couldn't do it. His hand was attached to the insolent little bastard's hand. More than that, The boy appeared to be strong beyond his years, or he was made of something noticeably heavier and harder than human flesh, because the Ilnian couldn't even move him. Lonnie saw the contempt in the Ilnian's eyes change to surprise, replaced by fear as the officer realized he couldn't even open his mouth to curse the beggar or call for security. The nanobots released by the threads were already at work on the Ilnian's nervous system, and now it was not so much him as Lonnie, who controlled his body and, to a certain extent, his brain. It was possible to download the entire memory of the Ilnian and find what Lonnie needed, but it would take a lot of time. So Lonnie did something else. "How many of you are on the Atlas liner?" Lonnie asked. A look of sheer terror flashed in the officer's eyes when, completely against his wishes, his mouth opened and spoke. 57 people, counting me. "Who are they?" "Imperial Special Forces Group Talon. What is your mission?" "Capture the liner by boarding it at the Sigma hyperspace buoy. Enter through the cargo airlock, unseen by the passengers, take the crew hostage, position yourself in the cargo hold, arrive at Beta Station, and depart with the liner to the Camo sphere after servicing. And in the sphere? Subversion, assassination of undesirable politicians, economic disruption, reconnaissance. If possible, make our actions appear to be conducted by the Terran Federation. Codename Operation Fox in the hen house." By this point, Lonnie had already blocked the nerves that controlled the Ilnian's facial muscles, but the aristocrat's eyes were filled with a desperation that bordered on insanity. One might even feel sorry for him, if one didn't know that this man was the commander of a squad of trained professional assassins intent on wreaking havoc on a perfectly peaceful union of planets, a union that Lonnie had been building and protecting for several hundred years. "The fox in the hen house, huh?" Lonnie said. "A good plan. You've overlooked something, though." He grinned when he saw the mute question on the stunned and almost insane Ilnian's face. Every coop always has an owner, and he really doesn't like it when uninvited guests try to make a mess of it. When he finally retracted the threads and removed his hand from the Ilnian's palm, the nanobots had already completely subdued the Imperial aristocrat's will. With a wooden gate, the officer went to the guard post to explain in detail what was happening and offer assistance in capturing the Imperial Special Forces as non-violently as possible. Lonnie gave him a thoughtful look. "They sometimes have interesting communities here, in this arm of the galaxy. Perhaps they might even come in handy when the time comes to harvest them. But until then, they would have to be kept under close control." He had been sure that the Ilnians would finally shut themselves down after the last defeat. But they were still hungry. He should get to know them better. A sudden thought struck him. What if he changed his activities a little? For a quarter of the galaxy's turn, he had been breeding exclusively for food species and was used to working in that direction. However, he had heard that fighting breeds were becoming increasingly fashionable in the metropolis. Lonnie looked at the Ilnian, who was already talking about his mission to the Andurians, who remained utterly unperturbed despite the extraordinary nature of what was happening. Only one of them said something into the communicator from time to time, obviously reporting to his superiors. Wow. And he had always thought of them as a weedy species, better suited for herding duties. Definitely worth investigating these Homo sapiens. Perhaps it would be better entertainment than pretending to be a station rat. Lonnie walked resolutely toward the guards, while his body started the preparation for the change according to the DNA information he received from the Ilnian officer. He still has 56 subjects to work on. "Excuse me, sir," he said, and took one of them by the arm. "I really need to get on the Atlas liner."